and I hope that you had a great week. So we're going to go ahead and get started with a welcome. Well, let me give you an overview first. So we're going to have a welcome and land acknowledgement by Dr. Ferris Sabah, who is our county superintendent. And then I'm going to give you, share a little bit with you about the community of practice that we've had over the past year. Then we'll go over some conversation agreements. And then we have 4 presenters today, Ashley, Jamie, Sophia, Suzanne, and Tamar. And then we'll have some closing remarks. All right. So this time we're going to open it up to Dr. Ferris Sabah.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Dr. Kofi, and good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. We'd like to, a new tradition that we've been implementing over the last couple of years has been a land acknowledgement to show respect, appreciation for the land and for our ancestors. And so I'm going to share my screen. If Dr. Kofi, if you wouldn't mind, give me or Debbie, see if it works now. No, not yet. If somebody could make me a co-host. All right. I'm so I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. And all right. So this is a land acknowledgement. You may not be physically seated where we are here in this area, but we'd like to show this, make this acknowledgement. The land in which we gather is the unceded territory of the Waswa speaking Wipi tribe. The Amamatsun tribal band, comprised of the descendants of indigenous people taken to Mission Santa Cruz and San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast, is today working hard to restore traditional stewardship practices on these lands and heal from historical trauma. Mm-hmm. Thank you for allowing me to share that with you, and thank you for being a part of this community of practice. Back to you, Dr. Kofi.
Thank you. So I just wanted to share with you a little bit about what the community of practice was really all about. The first thing that it was really about, it was about building community in the sense of really trying to connect with people who are already doing this work, right? So that there is a deep sense of belonging, someone that people can talk to. It was also a time for us to lament, right? To be able to share the deep pain that we often carry when we see or experience injustices that are taking place within society, and in particular, educational injustices. But then lastly, we don't want to stay there, right? We want to be able to cultivate a deep sense of hope. And so that's what we really did for the past almost year. For about a year now, we've been really striving to build community and to build that community so that we can create a more racially just society. This opportunity was also about being able to learn how to be a scholar practitioner, right? And a part of being a scholar practitioner is being able to ask questions that oftentimes the general public is not willing to ask for one reason or another. Also, it was an opportunity for us to become familiar with scholars who are doing this work. Oftentimes when we go out to the bookstore, whether that's Target, anywhere, oftentimes there's books on the shelf, but the question is, well, what books do we read? Who's really diving deep into this work in such a way that we can think about racial equity and educational justice in a different way? And then lastly, this work was also about being able to challenge our own thought patterns, because the reality is all of us have been socialized to think, to act, and to behave in ways that are often consistent or congruent with the status quo. And so we spent time really trying to understand our own social identities and what that means for us, and in particular, past events, what it meant for us in our own educational journeys, but then what it means for us as we continue to move forward. So I want to share with you a video before we jump into our presentations that really explains, it's a very short video that really explains what we're trying to do, right? Because you're going to hear presentations from your friends, your family, your colleagues, about things that are near and dear to their heart, things that they want to address in regard to their teaching and administrative practices. And this video really emphasizes what we're trying to do in regard to educational equity.
In a small fishing village, a group of folk gathered at the river. Not long after they got there, a child came floating down the rapids calling for help. One of the group on the shore quickly dived in and pulled the child out. But minutes later, another child came, and then another, and then many more children were coming down the river. Soon, everyone was diving in and dragging children to the shore, then jumping back in to save as many as they could. In the midst of all this frenzy, one of the group was seen walking away. Her colleagues were furious. How could she leave when there were so many children to save? Then, after long hours, to everyone's relief, the flow of children stopped, and the group could finally catch their breath. At that moment, their colleague came back. They turned on her and angrily shouted, "Hey, how could you walk off when we needed everyone here to save the children?" She replied, "It occurred to me that someone ought to go upstream and find out why so many kids were falling into the river. What I found is that the old wooden bridge had several planks missing, and when some children tried to jump over the gap, they couldn't make it and fell through into the river. So I got someone to fix the bridge."
For years, the laws in California have protected child molesters and the institute.
Okay, so that basically explained what we're really.
The oil and gas industry is a lot more complex than you may imagine.
All right, that's what we're trying to really do. We're trying to fix that bridge, right? And we know that bridges, exist within the TK through 12 system. We know that they exist within the community college system. And so the action plans or the presentations that you'll be hearing, those are our attempts to be able to fix the bridge as opposed to jumping in the water. Because if we learn how to fix the bridge, then we'll all be safe, okay? So here's a few conversation agreements for us to think about and to help guide our conversations today. The first one is to be open and honest, right? So at a certain point, we're gonna have an opportunity to ask questions. But in this process, I'd like for all of us just to be able to be open, right, to new possibilities, to new ways of thinking, new questions. Also for us to really embrace the opportunity to learn and to listen respectfully and listen for perspective, because everyone is unique. And so they have their own unique lived experience or perspective or the way in which they see the world. And with that in mind, all perspectives are valid. And so we want to welcome them and accept them. Also, we want to be open to new perspectives or the way in which we approach problems. So in the video, we saw that there were some people who decided to jump right in the creek, right? But then there's others who decided to step out of the creek and to go and look for the root cause of the problem, which was the bridge. And as I shared before, this work is really about building community. And so we learn together, right? When we think about the traditional educational process, which is based on positivism, right? Knowledge is disseminated, right? Students come in, they sit down, and then the teacher tells them what to think, what to believe, how to act. But the work that we're doing, it's focused on constructivism, or in essence, being able to practice knowledge, right? To integrate knowledge into our everyday lives, into our profession, and into our work. And as I share with this, with the community and with the group when we started out back in September, is to prepare yourself for discomfort, right? Because in order to change, there has to be some tension. We have to be able to think about thought patterns that basically leave us in the status quo, right? The path of least resistance. Also, to trust and honest discussion will help us to advance our understanding and growth. And so as we go through the presentations, Please feel free to ask questions in the chat. And then as we get to the end of each individual presentation, I'll read out the questions if you have any in the chat, or you can feel free to unmute and ask questions. And each presenter will have about maybe 3 to 5 minutes to take and answer questions, but we can always be flexible, right? You know, there might be one question for one presentation and 3 for another. So we'll be flexible with that. All right, so at this time, we're going to begin with our first presenter, Ashley Bauer, who works at Monterey Bay Academy. And Ashley is going to focus on culturally relevant leadership and racial healing at Monterey Bay Academy. So Ashley, feel free to go ahead and share your screen and you can take it away. And then what I'll do also is I'll set a timer because the presenter will have about 10 minutes to go ahead and present their work. All right, take it away, Ashley.
Thank you, Dr. Kofi. Hello. As it was said, I am from Monterey Bay Academy, which is a private school on the Watsonville coast. We're a pretty small school. We've got about 160 students in the high school. And so it's not very big. And so I find myself sometimes struggling with other problems because it's a private religious school than maybe some of these other schools. But we all kind of have the same basis of these trauma that kids have, and they need to be addressed no matter what school you're at. So to begin, here's a bit of a personal motivation, which kind of goes over my experience when I was in high school. I went to a private Christian school just like the one I was teaching at, and felt that there wasn't a lot of acknowledgement towards the non-dominant group, which would be heterosexual, Christian, and white. If you kind of fell outside of those bounds, you weren't really acknowledged, you weren't addressed, and yet there are still those kids who fall outside of that group that need to be addressed, that need to feel heard, that need to feel like they belong. And so when I realized that I wanted to be a teacher, I understood that I had to be that person that I always looked for when I was in high school, and I had to be a safe space for students who fell outside of that group, who were marginalized and who were othered. And being a teacher, this is only my second year teaching, so I haven't had a whole bunch of experience. But just in those few moments when I have been able to have kids come up to me and open up to me, or with any myriad of issues, whether it be racially related or not, whether they're just struggling with anything, those moments where kids come up to you and feel safe and vulnerable are the moments that make teaching worthwhile, in my opinion. And even in these just year and a half that I've been teaching, I've been able to notice what a difference it makes when they have that, and what a difference it makes when they don't have that. And it can really make an impact, not just on their emotional state, but how that translates into the community, and how it translates into even their grades, how they're doing academically, because students aren't really trying to perform for teachers who they feel don't care about them, or who aren't really looking out for them. So I kind of gathered some data to answer this sort of like problem statement. So when I analyzed what the issue was at Monterey Bay Academy, specifically my school, the main statement to kind of encompass the whole thing is that Monterey Bay Academy has not provided humanizing spaces for students from racially minoritized communities to process racial trauma on a consistent basis. So I want to make sure the students always have an opportunity to process whatever they're going through, but specifically focusing on students from racially minoritized communities. So I gathered data from the California Healthy Kids Survey, which was taken in 2018 and 19, and they're based off of 9th grade and 11th grade. So this is the 9th grade one, and the asterisks down at the bottom show that each table shows the percentage of students who responded with agree or strongly agree to the questions related to each school issue. So the first category, average. So for example, 62% of kids in 9th grade agree or strongly agree that they have a caring adult relationship. But then if you go down the list, if you are not average, if you identify within the LGBT community or the Hispanic/Latinx community or the African American community, it goes down. And as you can see, it's comparative for all of the other ones. So chronic sadness or helplessness. If on average, just a 28%, which is great. You don't want a whole bunch of kids being chronically sad or feeling hopeless. Yet that number skyrockets for LGBTQ communities, and it's also higher in the Hispanic/Latinx. And then, as you can see, safe at school and school connectedness, it really struggles. Kids aren't feeling like they're safe, or that they're connecting, or that they have that teacher that they can feel safe around. And then this is the 11th grade version of that, which is very similar. Similar numbers, bigger pools of kids, but same thing. Kids don't always feel safe at school. They don't feel like they have someone that they can be vulnerable around, that they can trust, and they don't feel like their school is connected in a way that will help them build community. And so going through all of that data, figuring out, well, if kids don't feel connected, what do I do? How am I supposed to help these kids feel connected and make sure that they feel safe enough in order to be able to process these like really intense racially based issues with mature adults who are ready to help them. And so I came up with some of these questions as to like, why do I need to address this, and what are some of the contributing factors specifically at MBA that I needed to address. So firstly, why don't they feel supported and safe at MBA? And the reason, teachers are not in the habit of working together to review these data results and all of this research. Well, then why aren't we meeting to go over these things? Well, we don't meet on a regular basis. Well, why don't we do that? Oh, well, the teacher consensus is not quite where it needs to be. We kind of have a hard time agreeing on best practices for increasing that sense of belonging. And then it comes back to, well, why aren't you guys getting along together? And then it's just kind of a whole overarching environment at MBA, which is a little bit chaotic because the principal is temporary, and we've had a lot of turnover. And so we haven't really had a stable set of environmental circumstances to make this happen. But that is not an excuse, which will be addressed in the action plan later on. But the next thing that we needed to do is obviously gather research. So this shouldn't just be made up on the spot, but what are scholars and researchers saying about this? Oh, and then, well, this is continued on, sorry. So some key points and recommendations from a few articles. I'm not gonna go through all of them, but overarching things. So recommendations: revising the school's mission statement to clarify goals. So making sure that the school's statement is actually, or their mission statement actually is achieving the goal that you want. Consistent training, that's another thing that's very important. And teachers should be meeting together to make sure that they all have the same goal and that they're working together to achieve those goals. Teachers and students can practice self-reflection. I really like that one because that has you focus on where are you at and where have you been given privileges in your life. Now put that on other people. Where have they been, and where have they been given privileges, and where have their privileges been taken away? So it's not just looking at yourself, but it's looking at where are students coming from and having them practice that as well. So students should be saying, what are my privileges and what are my oppressions as well? And how can I translate that into the people around me? Teachers should be adjusting their curriculum. So you should not be teaching the same thing that you were 40 years ago. You need to be consistently updating and making sure that your teaching is culturally relevant, because this is a completely different world than it was 40 years ago. I wasn't even alive 40 years ago. So, I mean, it's obviously totally different. And so we need to be able to adjust to that as well. And another thing is that including students in the process is really important, because not only does that include them, but they get to have a voice and they recognize the power in that. So you are giving power to the students that we are trying to reach in this whole place. And so they feel like they matter, and they do matter. But it's important to make that step to show that they do. And then lastly, for the recommendations, making sure that curriculum goes beyond traditional content. So I teach English. And so when I teach American Lit, I am not just teaching old white men. I'm teaching current authors. I am teaching Latinx authors, LGBT authors. I'm teaching Native American authors. I'm teaching anyone that is relevant to these kids now. because it's important for kids to be able to see themselves in what I'm teaching, because if they can't, they're not going to feel like they can achieve those goals. So we need to be constantly revising to match what is culturally relevant. And then I like this phrase here: assess curriculum against a scorecard that measures representation, social justice, and materials. So who are we representing? Is it just, and does everyone have access to it? Am I making sure that all of my kids can have access to what I'm giving them? And then lastly, partnering with parents to understand the child's learning style and a whole myriad of other things. But communication with parents is essential to really understand the whole child. So all of that culminates in an action plan. What are we going to do with all of this information that has been given? So the main goal, will the creation and facilitation of quarterly meetings for teachers at MBA to discuss climate survey data lead to a deeper sense of belonging among students from racially minoritized communities? And so essentially that's broken down into 5 different goals. So specific, it's quarterly meetings that we are getting together. It's measurable. I want every teacher there because we can't just leave out teachers. Everyone needs to be a part of this, needs to be a whole school-wide involvement. Achievable, it's going to be one Thursday and it's already on the calendar for next year. So there should be no reason for someone to say, oh, I missed it, because it's there. Relevance, so quarterly meetings will help teachers to be more effective at teaching students from racially minoritized communities, which will in turn increase academic, interpersonal, and intrapersonal success of students from racially minoritized communities. And then the time bound, those are the specific days that they're happening and the times. So everything is measurable and specific, and we should be able to check those boxes at the end of the year that we have been able to do those things. And then the logic model for that, so we have who's involved: the principal, the director of student services, all of the teachers. And then in this column here is taken directly from our action plan from 2019, the goals that the teachers should fulfill. So communication of strategies and known practices, that fits. Scheduled activities for increasing camaraderie and collaboration, that fits. And a forum for teachers to share their best practices. Because if we're not collaborating as a school together, it's gonna feel like each teacher is different and that there's no melding of ideas and practices. The outputs, so quarterly meetings, like I said, and it's really just about making sure that we can all come together to teach each other and learn from each other about how to be culturally relevant. So I want to make sure that every teacher attends these meetings and that they're engaging too, not just passively listening, but they are walking away with tools that will help them include these relevant teachings in their classrooms. And then at the end, you know, it's a lofty goal, but I would love to have 100% of non-white students at MBA having that really deep sense of belonging by the end of that 2024-25 school year. So a sense that they belong, that they are important, and that they matter, and that we are there for them. And that is my action plan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashley, for all that you shared. And I hope that all who were listening, that you'll be able to take back what she shared with us and to begin to implement it. But not only that, to build deeper relationships with Ashley, to be able to ask her questions, right? Because this is her work, right? This is what she's going to be focusing on as she continues in her professional journey. And so I would definitely encourage you to have meetings, grab some coffee or tea, and to have some deeper discussions. So at this time, we're going to open up the room for any questions that someone might have for Ashley. So please feel free to go ahead and unmute if you have some questions about anything, you know, whether it was, you know, this journey through this process, maybe some of the challenges or barriers, hopes that she's experienced, anything that you might want to know. Okay, Suzanne.
Well, Ashley, it's amazing. So I'm trying to recall it all, but it sounds like you're looking at collaborating some more and looking at data as a starting point. Is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah.
And then when you look at the data, because you already have some data, right? But you want to look at it collaboratively with your staff and your colleagues.
Correct.
So look at it. Then do you have a sense of like where you might go from there? Like when you, after you look at data, what might be some next steps that you're looking at from that and having those collaborative opportunities with your staff?
Yeah, good question. Because I think that the data is the most important part, because if people don't see that there's a problem, they're not going to want to address it. And so starting on that basis of, look, this is something that our kids are actually feeling and actually going through, is an important first start. But then after that, I think it becomes, well, what are the things that we do? So that's when we start discussing best practices, or how do you make sure that you include marginalized authors in your teaching, or man, it's hard for me to give examples from like science. I don't know anything about science. But specifically for like English related things, it would be focusing on how is my curriculum more than just what has been traditionally taught for the past 30 years. How am I kind of branching out of that? And how are you doing that? And I want to hear from other people. I want to make sure that we're sharing what we're doing, because then I could give examples about science, because right now I don't have any, I don't know. And so I would love to also be able to have that wealth of knowledge for different curriculums as well, so that I just have it, because I think that that's important to have, that we don't just put all of our eggs in one basket. But that's kind of where I see it going after that.
Thanks.
And we have a question in the chat from Wendy. It says, I'm wondering how you built a coalition with the principal and teachers to create a plan and willingness to engage, RE, inclusion, belonging, and sharing of best practices.
Well, that's a fun question, because so on my action plan, where it had the logic model of inputs, so I talked to the principal and the director of student services. And the teachers are kind of like, this is something you're doing. It's more of I kind of cleared it with the director of student services, who is the person who really helps our students succeed. I mean, she does like all of the tutoring after school, because we only have one of those at our small little private schools. And so she is really got the students at heart. And so I kind of only had to clear it with her and the principal. And so it's more like, put this on your calendar. This is something that's happening. And so that part was kind of easy, I think.
And Ashley, I'm curious, are you going to help facilitate that or help design how to do that?
Yeah, exactly. So because this is kind of, I guess I would call it my baby. This is something that I plan on taking by the reins and making sure that that I facilitate, that I make sure that everyone is on the same page, on board, kind of be like a moderator almost.
I just have to say, I totally applaud you as a second-year teacher. I mean, way to go.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, great.
May I ask a question?
You sure can.
I happen to know Ashley from Union College in Lincoln, Nebraska. She's an alum of our school. I'm an English professor here at Union. And I want to know from you, Ashley, what did you get or not get at Union that would have better prepared you as a teacher? Because in our system as Seventh-day Adventists, most of the teachers who teach in our academies are taught in Adventist colleges as well. So what should we be doing, do you think, to prepare teachers so that we're doing this from multiple angles?
That is an excellent question, and one that I actually haven't thought a lot about. But the first thing that pops into my head is especially during COVID, when we had a lot of free time, I did a lot of reading, which I'm sure a lot of us did. But during that reading, a lot of what I read was, I guess, nonfiction about social justice related issues. So for example, I read like The New Jim Crow. So think along those lines of books. And that was incredible for me to be able to read those kinds of books that talk about issues that are happening currently. And I feel like maybe when I was in college, I didn't have any classes that specifically addressed what's going on right now in the world. What are the issues that I need to address as a teacher that these students are going to be going through, especially when it comes to diversity, which I know that you're teaching a class about that now, but I didn't have that. But a class that would specifically focus on how do you reach communities outside of your own?
Yeah,
Thank you.
great question. Okay, so let's get ready to go ahead and transition to our next presentation, which is from, let's see, this is Jamie Brown, who will be presenting on staff development as a pathway to practicing anti-racism. And Jamie works at the Santa Cruz County Office of Education. So Jamie, it's all yours.
Thank you. Oh, I'm so glad that Ashley went first because I think it goes perfectly into my problem of practice. So thank you, Ashley. So I work for the Santa Cruz County Office of Education in the Ed Services Department. I'm Assistant Director of the Santa Cruz Silicon Valley New Teacher Project, and we are an induction program that mentors beginning teachers. And so my focus is on staff development as a pathway to practicing anti-racism. To give you a little bit of my personal motivation, I'm first generation American. And so growing up, I have heard stories from my mom and our family about immigrating to the United States and finding the negative impact of assimilating to the American culture. And so in the last 10 years, we have tried to connect back to our culture through a community of Indos, that's Dutch Indonesian peoples. And it's really helped to inform my attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors as an educator and as a mother. And simultaneously, in the last few years, through my professional work, our program goal is to develop anti-racist educators who focus on student outcomes. And so through that, I've really been reflecting on how do you develop awareness with staff, with mentors and teachers around practicing anti-racism. And it's been really rewarding to see how we have the power to change belief systems and practices. So at the very bottom, you'll see my essential question. My personal motivation has led me to wonder, how do we ensure that our educational leaders are adequately prepared to explore anti-racism in order to teach students from racially minoritized communities in a humanizing way? My problem of practice, my problem statement is that a significant portion of our new teacher mentors are not adequately prepared to cultivate anti-racist teaching practices among their mentees. So this year, the data showed that 30% of our staff was new to mentoring this year, and we are asking them to develop anti-racist, culturally responsive educators. Also, we looked at our data from last year from our teachers, and our teachers reported that they're engaging in conversations with their mentor around race and racism. So our mentors need to be prepared for those conversations and to help facilitate those. Not only are they having those conversations, but they're also talking about what does it mean to be an anti-racist educator. Another data set I pulled forth was the demographics, the racial demographics of our teachers compared to our mentors. And you'll see in the top right that the majority of our mentors are identify racially as white, and that is a larger percentage than our teachers that we are supporting. And then we have several other racially diverse groups, and our mentors, our mentor population has a smaller percentage of those who identify as those groups compared to our teachers. And so how do we come together and learn how to learn together around anti-racism? I want to share with you some of the contributing factors by going through the process of the 5 whys. And I'd love to invite my colleague, Melissa, to help bring voice to this. And so she's going to ask the questions and I'm going to pose the answers, the possibilities of why this is happening. Melissa, can you read the first one, please?
Absolutely. Hi. Number 1. Why is a significant portion of new teacher mentors not adequately prepared to cultivate anti-racist teaching practices among their mentees?
Not all mentors have learned about anti-racism in their teaching credential program.
Why haven't all mentors learned about anti-racism in their teaching credential program?
Teaching credential programs have only recently begun to integrate social justice, culturally responsive pedagogy, and anti-racism into their curriculum.
Why have teaching credential programs only recently begun to integrate social justice, culturally responsive pedagogy, and anti-racism into their curriculum?
Anti-racism has not been at the forefront of our socio-political context and our collective consciousness, both in education and society.
Why has anti-racism not been at the forefront of our socio-political context and collective consciousness?
We didn't have a critical incident that was strong enough to cause cognitive dissonance, where we begin to question events and concepts that just don't make sense.
Why did we not have a critical incident that was strong enough to cause cognitive dissonance?
Because being not racist and ignoring issues that are complex is comfortable and safe. And some of the content of the 5 whys comes from Bobby Harrow and the article, The Cycle of Liberation, which I've linked in here. So if everyone has access to this, I can give access to this later. Thank you, Melissa, for helping me to explain the why this could be happening. I also have some other contributing factors. And what was really empowering in this process was grounding some of the problems I'm noticing and the data in research-based texts and practices and just research. And so I pulled forth 3 different resources, and really what I want to narrow in on, because it's the reason why we're here today, or what are they recommending? So again, you can click on the title and get access yourself to these articles. But the first recommendation is that in our teacher preparation programs, we need to explicitly model culturally responsive practices that prioritize and affirm teacher candidates from diverse groups. If we model that, then we'll be able to help show teachers that we care about them. We want them to go into teaching, and that, hey, here are some things that you can also do in your own classroom. The next article brought forth the recommendation that we need to engage in personal strategies to sustain our roles as anti-racist, critical, multicultural educators. So they recommended using prayer, meditation, reflective journaling as a means of developing self-understanding and accountability. So as I was doing this research, I'm thinking about what can we do to build it into our induction. I'm going to close my window. Excuse me. Thanks. And the last one, the recommendation was that social justice should be a part of teaching, that we need to bring language and culture out of the closet and into the curriculum, relish bilingualism and biculturalism, and teach students that understanding the world in different ways is valuable and it's even glorious. And so how do I take these ideas? What is that going to look like? Well, here's my action plan. My goal is that I want to offer a professional development series that onboards new mentors with this integration of anti-racism and culturally responsive pedagogy. So in the past, we would say, welcome to mentoring. We're going to build trust. We're going to learn about effective teaching practices, and then we're going to do that with our teachers. Yes, that is still a really important part for our mentors. But if we want to really prepare our teachers to know their students, like Ashley was saying, then we need to integrate anti-racism into the core of what we're talking about and not just an add-on. And so 100% of our new mentors will engage in this series. And it's going to be achievable because of a few things. We've already communicated, save the dates for these PD series. We're going to make this learning accessible via Zoom and in person. We are providing anchor texts in advance to get them access to some of these foundational ideas. And then we'll have strategic plans for makeups if they can't attend. This is relevant because by providing this Coaching for Equity PD series, then we'll provide the tools for mentors to develop anti-racist and culturally responsive goals with their teachers. And then that will anchor these amazing inquiry cycles that are equity focused. Again, it's in the heart, it's in the bones of what they're doing as they're learning how to be teachers with their own students. And lastly, this is time bound. We're going to do this in the fall. I'm going to start working on this June 1st. So we're ready. The last thing I wanted to share with you in my final minute is that I'm really excited to take a step back and think about how this is going to incorporate so many people from our community. So it's going to incorporate the assistant directors of our programs and the directors as we design the content and we facilitate it. And then we'll have our new mentors be participants. I also linked in here our Santa Cruz County Office of Ed strategic plan. And I feel that my action plan connects to priority 1, 2, and 3, in that we are going to provide ongoing professional learning for our mentors and teachers. We are going to address achievement gaps by putting at the forefront that we need to have the tools to make sure our marginalized students are not left behind. And lastly, we're going to be having an effective induction program so that we can decrease teacher shortages and increase highly effective teachers, because they're going to be committed to their students and know how to relate to them. Just to wrap up, I have 10 seconds. I'm going to say that my end goal is right here on the right-hand side. By spring of 2023, my goal is that 70% of our teachers and mentors will make explicit connection between their professional goals and anti-racist practices in the form of doable actions. In 2021, it was at 44%. So that's my end goal. And thanks for listening.
Thank you, Jamie. Excellent job. So what we want to do now is we want to go ahead and open up the room for any questions that you might have for Jamie.
Woohoo, go JB.
I don't have a question so much, Jamie, as a comment. I think you mentioned it at the start, how there's already this really strong connection between Ashley's passion and commitment and work. And then your presentation encourages us to think about how do we support those who are doing this work. So pausing and reflecting and journaling are so important. And I think it's just such a wonderful through line of
Oh, looks like we lost Angela. Well, while we're waiting for Angela to come back, this is an iterative process, right? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Angela.
We lost you, Angela. Are you back?
Oh, I'm back. I probably said something really profound.
The last thing we heard is that there's a through line between teacher Ashley and myself in terms of providing support around what are the concrete tools to connect with our students and be anti-racist.
Absolutely. And just the importance of paying attention to how we're impacting the impact that's providing for students, and also measuring the impact for the teachers doing that important work. So just an affirmation.
Yep.
Thank you.
And as I was saying, this is an iterative process, right? Every participant is going to go through and do their work, but even as they do the work and they get to the end of it, there's an evaluation process, right? How do we do, right? If the goal was 70%, maybe we got to 55%. Okay, well, what do we need to do to make improvements to go from 55 to 70, right? And as I was listening to your presentation, one thing that stood out to me, you talked about prayer and meditation. And there is one of the leading writers in this area of student success is Tara Yoso, who writes about community cultural wealth. And there's 6 different capitals that she speaks about. Like one of them is familiar capital, and how students can use or tap into their family for strength as they go through the education process. But then afterwards, because it's an iterative process, there was another person by the name of Lindsay Huber who came and said, well, we also need to think about spiritual capital, right? That the students who go to our schools, and it oftentimes is difficult for us, or we have a little bit more barriers because we work at a public institution. Sometimes it can be a little bit more different or difficult to speak about spirituality. But a part of the student development process or student success is thinking about how students connect spiritually, right? How do they use their faith or spirituality to persist through challenges that they might experience on a day-to-day basis? I just wanted to put that out there, that spirituality is critical, right, to the development of all of our students. All right, any other questions for Jamie?
I have one. So Jamie, you are coming up against the your second year with this focus on growing anti-racist educators, and in addition to being a tremendous assistant director, you're also a mentor to a number of teachers. So I'm curious, as you think back on the past 2 years, what advice would you give yourself, thinking about, what it means to be an anti-racist leader?
Yeah. Okay. The biggest advice I would give myself and anyone who's willing to give an ear is the power of self-reflection and space to think back to when their development over the years as a student. That has been a breakthrough. Like once you engage in that, you find the passion for each person, and that passion can light the way for anything you do around anti-racism. And so if you just move forward with the practices, it's just, they're not lofty. They're just like Kleenex, just falling. But if you really talk to them about their experiences as a person, a human being, that's the way to go. And so by doing that, I've discovered teachers who on the outside seem like burnt out, or they don't want to do another thing. When you tap into that, they have this well of inspiration. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Thank you.
And Wendy?
I noticed that well, first of all, I just really am inspired, and I'm super excited about the equity PD that you're going to do. And, I just know this is going to make a huge difference. And I'm curious, because you're aligning with the county office strategic plan, and the first outcome is around social and emotional learning and well-being of students. I'm curious how you're linking, or how you're thinking about social and emotional learning, social and emotional literacy with equity and culturally responsive pedagogy.
Yeah, it's pretty similar to what I just said in the fact that I want to really work with mentors to figure out how can they work with teachers to provide spaces in class for individuals and for groups to tap into what are they feeling with their body physically before, during, and after they engage in these discussions. Because I think if we attune to that, then people's needs will be met and they'll feel more brave to continue the dialogue, I think.
Thank you, Jamie. And I'm also hearing a foundational component is cultivating self-awareness, right? Reflecting on your own experience and how you feel. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think when we first started this program goal, we were kind of like moving ahead, and then we're like, whoa, we got to slow down with the awareness piece and really build that out. So that was a huge aha.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Good. Yeah, the self-reflection is really critical, right? And once you understand who you are, then you can begin to make adjustments, right? And you can also teach, your colleagues and students how do you reflect as well. So before we transition to our last presentation, I did want to say that there were other presenters who were going to present today, but just due to constraints that everyone wasn't able to present, right? And it's valid, right? I don't even want to say that we're out of COVID, but the reality is, especially in education, a lot of people are experiencing burnout, right? Exhaustion, right? Just trying to make it. So I wanted to celebrate them for being a part of this opportunity, right? Even though they're not presenting today. So I just wanted to celebrate David, who is, I believe, is in the room as well, Ejraj. And if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong, please forgive me. So I wanted to celebrate David, Thania, who is also a student, because we also were working with students across the county as well. So there was one group for educators and one group for students. Celeste Gutierrez, who also works in the Santa Cruz County Office of Education. Tamir Bagheera, Chris Brobeck, and then also Margot Ross as well, to celebrate them for the great work that they're doing. So the last person that we have, or persons that we have, two people decided to do a project together, right? Which was an option that that I told the group it's available to you, right? Because this is not just about doing something within our own domain of influence, but we're also a community, right? It's about partnership, right? And so Sophia Sorensen and Susan Denham, who also work at the Santa Cruz County Office of Education, are going to come and present on addressing transformational social and emotional learning for multilingual learners in Santa Cruz County. So Sophia and Suzanne, you now have the room.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Just a little fumbling new setup at home for the screen sharing. So I'm hoping you're seeing our slides. Yes?
You got it, Sophia.
I got it. Okay. Suzanne's going to be my coach through this. And I just want to say thank to Dr. Kofi for putting together this night. I think the sequencing of the different presentations is very strategic. They really, I think, build on each other. The work starting with Ashley and then Jamie talking about what it means to be an anti-racist educator. And then Suzanne and I really thinking, Jamie focusing on the mentors and the entering teachers, right? And then Suzanne and I really thinking about the continued professional learning of teachers once they are past that induction point. So I think I'm going to go. Suzanne, you want to add anything to that before I move to the next slide?
Job. Thank you. I totally agree. I think we've got it's an aligned, continuous articulation of a plan. So it's great.
Yeah. So I want to start just by sharing a little bit, of how I'm entering into this work. So I'm the multilingual coordinator for the County Office of Education. And my own personal background, right, is growing up in a white family, but also a Spanish-speaking family. And so ever since I've been a child, I've been really sort of reflecting and grappling and observing, exploring, what does it mean to be a white Spanish-speaking person in the United States? Because the reality is, in the United States, being a Spanish speaker is usually racialized, right? If you're a Spanish speaker, you're assumed to be brown, not white. And so there's always been this sort of tension that really, I think, highlights the role that race plays. Like I know for myself, because I've had conversations with my friends who are not white but speak Spanish, what it's like for them to speak Spanish in public, right? And what it's like for them to speak Spanish to their children versus my own experience. And so one of the things that I really appreciated about this community of practice were the readings. And Jamie talked about the cycle of oppression that we read. And one of the readings that really I found very helpful was the 5 Faces of Oppression. And I really appreciated the precision with which that article gave me language to speak about the oppression of multilingual learners in our county. And we'll just be really clear that 92% of our multilingual learners in our county come from Spanish-speaking families. Another approximately 4% come from Indigenous families. And then we know we also have our Asian American families. I know we have some African languages. So really, again, in our county, race and language are intertwined. It's not something that can be separated. These racially minoritized students, that's their experience. So this 5 Faces of Oppression really highlighted to me that the term that I would use to explain what it would be like to be a multilingual learner in our community is to be marginalized, right? So these are students that are excluded or pushed to the margins of the school experience. And so one really specific example that I want to give is that when I started working at the county office, I met with the principals at different middle schools. And they all, when I asked them what they were proud of in their schools, they all really described their elective programs. And at that time, at all of those schools, their English learner students were not in their elective programs because they had an ELD period at their elective time. So we actually have made some progress on that. So it's a good example of how sometimes bringing things to people's attention and working for change can produce change. And what is still, I think, a challenge, though, is really thinking about how do you make sure that these students are really included and invited to be part of the classroom community of learners. But that is part of our EL roadmap work, principle 1, where we really talk about being asset-oriented and needs-responsive. And so that is something I'm really passionate about. And I was really happy to connect with Suzanne and start talking about this transformational social emotional learning, because I think that is part of the process of making sure that the students are really included and, again, not pushed to the margins of their classroom learning community. So Suzanne, I'm going to let you talk now.
All right. Well, thanks. That's perfect, because really this is a collaboration between Sophia and I, and we each brought kind of our own perspective and interest. And just for a little background, I was a teacher for 30 years, a classroom teacher in SoCal for 30 years. And then I was the social emotional academic development teacher on special assignment in SoCal, and then worked with families that were doing a home-based learning model during COVID. And now I'm at the County Office of Education doing social emotional academic development for the whole county. And so when we came to this project, I started thinking back about when I was in school, like how I would really go through either like eagerness or total dread about going into each class. Like, especially I think of like middle school, but even in elementary school, like, was I eager to go in? Was I eager to participate? Or was I like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm going to do for the next hour or whole day or whatever it was. And I thought about what is it that really that impacted how I felt about going to classrooms. And it really was I feeling like I was going to be included? Was I seen? Was I respected? Was I valued? And I started really thinking about that. And then as a teacher, when I first started teaching, it was really a lot about controlling the class, like the teacher really controlling everybody. And, you know, there was that kind of, I can't remember the assertive discipline model. And over the years, we've really learned about the neuroscience behind connection and feeling connected, and the chemicals that are released when you feel like you're seen and heard and included and belong. And that, you know, led to us looking at the transformative SEL competencies, which are understanding identity and agency, belonging, collaborative problem solving skills, and curiosity, and how those are fostered through intentional relationship-centered environments that build on strengths and are culturally relevant and responsive. So, you know, that's we try to put that together with what Sophia was looking at. And then for some of the data that I've been able to be, you know, witness to is that 4 years ago, when we were working on the MTS, or the multi-tiered systems of support, kind of dissecting, breaking apart and weaving together again, we found a relationship when we looked at some of our school data between behavior referrals, academic learning concerns, and social emotional needs for kids, that those kids were often the same kids that had those three things. And then 2 years later, our racial justice task force was looking at the referrals again. And again, we found a disproportionate number of students that had referrals were racially minoritized students. So kind of looking at where do those pieces fit into this. So as we move forward, we're kind of looking at how do we put those pieces together, and looking at how do we support all students to feel more included and belonging, so that they're more successful overall. So Sophia, do you want to talk about the data that we collected this year?
Yeah, and so I think one of the challenges always is to locate the work within your sphere of influence, right? And actually within your sphere of control. So we thought really about what do we directly impact, what do we directly control here at the county office, and we realized that it's really the trainings that we offer. So our problem statement is this, that the content training that is offered at the Santa Cruz County Office of Education does not always explicitly address strategies that teachers might utilize to provide transformative social emotional learning needed for Latinx students or English learners, so that they can develop their identity, agency, belonging, collaborative problem solving skills, and curiosity, right? So are we being really explicit about what it's going to take for these students to feel invited to be a part of that classroom community of learners? And so we did a survey of our content coordinators to find out, well, to what extent are you already including transformative SEL strategies in your trainings? And what we found is that people are incorporating strategies, but not necessarily explicitly. And we feel that the explicitness is actually really important for supporting content teachers in realizing the importance of doing this work in order for their students to fully engage in the classroom and fully do the learning. So I think that that's good on the slide, right, Suzanne?
I think so.
Yeah, okay. So Suzanne's going to talk a little bit more about TESOL.
Yeah, just to, this is how we define transformative SEL for the teachers as that, well, if you look at this, that 5 SEL competencies are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And then transformative SEL highlights these constructs within each of those. So there's identity, agency, belonging, collaborative problem solving, with an aim at redistributing power and promoting social justice through increased engagement. So that's what we gave teachers as like, here's the definition that we're looking at and what we're working towards, and how are we actually integrating this into our training and our share and our professional development with teachers so that they are able to integrate it. So explicitly teach it and integrate it into the work that they're doing with students, so that as we train teachers, they're integrating it with their students, and the adults are learning as well. And like I said, you've got 2 of us here, so we've got a lot, but this is just a little, this really kind of fleshes out here what transformative SEL is, and really looks at like, how do we partner with students and share decision making, make sure that we're integrating issues of race, class, culture, that we're making sure that we're being culturally relevant and building on students' assets and experiences and identities, enhancing the transformative SEL competencies within social emotional competencies, and really focusing on creating belonging in environments that engage everyone.
So, and again, I will just say that so many of these echo the work that we're doing when we do our training around the EL roadmap. Principle 1 around assets-based instruction, needs responsive. And so there's a really natural overlap, but are we being really explicit with our educators about that, those connections? So our 5 whys, this is still me, right, Suzanne?
This is all you. Yep.
Our 5 whys. So we started with asking ourselves, so why aren't we explicitly already including these TESOL strategies? Why is it more implicit and not explicit? And our response was, well, we haven't actually received formal training in TESOL yet. So it's hard, I think, to feel competent in doing something when you don't feel you've actually been trained. And so why haven't we yet received that formal training? And I think that the answer there lies in really our US academic tradition is really to divide expertise into distinct disciplines. So we have, our math and our science and our arts and our language arts, right? And we don't necessarily integrate those trainings or integrate the SEL, the social emotional piece of learning together. And so why has it traditionally been siloed and offered separately? And we think because its essential role in supporting academic learning has not been widely accepted and understood. Wendy's nodding. And so, but why hasn't it been more widely accepted, right? I mean, this is kind of like an obvious thing, right? Like we all know that motivation and engagement, these matter for learning. So why are we siloing it off? And we've really thought that this has to do that it's been acceptable to attribute differences in students' performance to sort of their fixed internal capacities, right? That we haven't had a growth mindset around students, and we haven't had a growth mindset about our educational system either, right? We haven't really located the responsibility for students' learning within the school system. We have a tendency to try and push it onto the students or the families. And so why do we have these beliefs? Why do we have these beliefs around these fixed capacities? And we really think that this comes from and flows into and supports racialized beliefs, right? We just had, as an educational system, we have had lower expectations for Latinx students. And because we have those lower expectations for them, we have lower expectations for ourselves. And this resonates with Jamie's point too, right? Like, and so therefore we've been slow to engage in that critical reflection of our own role in producing lower outcomes for our Latinx students. Pausing for you, Suzanne, if you want to add anything.
You did a great job. Thank you.
So we did some literature review just to make sure that, we're in touch with that. And so this is just an article about TESOL, and it's sort of like how it's this transformation of social emotional learning that's really focusing on race and ethnicity, and addressing that explicitly, and making sure that we look at culture, identity, agency, and embodiment and engagement as really the key parts of the TESOL for the of the TESOL.
Really promoting equity through transformative social emotional learning.
Yeah, this was a really interesting article that looked at the New Zealand context, finding similar things like reinforcing the importance of doing social emotional learning for students while they're dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, but also really highlighting that it's not appropriate to use SEL that's from a different cultural context, that you really need to think about what is the cultural context of your classroom and of your students when you're doing that work.
Can I add to that, that it was just interesting that they called it C-CEL, cultural social emotional learning, like to making sure that it's co-constructed. And then when you think about your social emotional environment and you want to support mental and emotional health, that you really need to take into consideration the cultural aspect of it. So that was kind of an interesting twist about how they, with the Maori people, and that they call it cultural.
Mm-hmm. And then I think you were going to speak about these, Suzanne.
Well, I think again that the first one was really looking at like how do we promote equity through transformative SEL, and then the second one was just, again, it was just really explaining the focal constructs of identity, agency, belonging, and collaborative problem solving and curiosity, and how do we foster those in our students to promote equity again. So there we go.
So our action plan. So our research question is essentially, will explicitly incorporating TESOL training and professional learning opportunities prepare content coordinators to train teachers to create culturally responsive environments that foster racial identity development, agency, belonging, collaborative problem solving, and responsible decision making for the collective well-being of Latinx students. So again, focusing on our locus of control, which is really the trainings that we provide for teachers. Our goal is to provide training for the content coordinators in TESOL, and we want 100% of them to attend these trainings. This is achievable because we already have collaboration time set aside that is flexible, so we can devote some of that to our TESOL training. And we also now have Suzanne as part of our staff who can be our TESOL expert to lead us in those trainings. It's relevant because participating in these trainings will prepare us to increase the success of students who identify as Latinx and multilingual. It's time bound. We hope to be doing this next year, and we will be identifying which dates of our collaboration time that we can use.
Our action plan, I mean, we've got my position, social emotional academic development, TOSA, our content coordinators, and again, we have our strategic priority 1, safety, engagement, and social emotional wellness, and that we're using. So kind of right along with Jamie, so we've got a big focus there, and that we're hoping that we'll have formal trainings on transformative SEL, collaboration sessions to design professional learning offerings where transformative SEL is integrated into specific content areas. And when I say integrated, I mean explicitly called out and integrated within the content. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. It doesn't mean it's stealth. It means that they know what's happening too. So we're having professional learning, and we're hoping that 100% of our content coordinators will attend the trainings, and that eventually we're shooting for 80% of our curriculum and instruction coordinators to report that they're explicitly including training on transformative SEL. and that we understand, stating the importance and of its impact on engagement and learning. And we realize that they may not happen all the time because it may not always be the focus, but that we're hoping that it happens more often. And I think our last slide really was kind of like one of our just brainstorm sessions. We left it there. Kind of, it's a little bit of a dangler in some ways, but it's kind of like, here's some of the ways we were thinking about working together. So some of the focal areas that we might have that would incorporate transformative SEL. And it's kind of like our brainstorm. How can we continue to collaborate together to kind of to push this out further into our community within the Santa Cruz County Office of Education, and how do we push it out into with our teachers and students throughout the county to foster more engagement overall.
Thank you, Suzanne. And I will say one of the benefits of this community of practice is it really did become a community. It was wonderful to collaborate with Suzanne, to have discussion with Jamie, with David, with Chris. Those are some of the people that are here today, but there's others that aren't here as well. And I really appreciate those opportunities for those conversations on these topics. So thank you, Dr. Kofi, for your work there, and everyone for participating. And I'm going to stop sharing.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Excellent presentation. And so now we're going to go ahead and open up the room for anyone who might have some questions. No questions? Okay, so as I was...
Wait, this may not be a question, but Debbie's laughing at me. I'm blown away. I'm so excited because when we began the social emotional learning work, we had this, just tiny little idea that, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if there could be congruence across the whole county office of education, and with the Santa Cruz Silicon Valley New Teacher Project coupled with the educational services team. I mean, just think about the huge impact that this is going to have on all educators and classified staff across our entire county and families. I mean, this is kind of I just think we have to take a moment to celebrate and acknowledge this kind of very comprehensive, coordinated, integrated planning, kind of independently by these two teams, yet in tangent. So I'm just so excited and happy. I just have to say thank you so much for everybody's such thoughtful approach. So, okay, that's it. It's not a question.
If we could all go ahead and unmute and give everybody a round of applause.
Woohoo!
We did it!
As I shared with the group back in September, and also along the way, is that it takes a lot of courage to do this, right? We're going against the status quo, right? And the greatest status quo is the one that's in us first, right? And it takes a lot of courage to look at ourselves in the mirror and to ask some very critical questions. And as I was listening to everyone's presentation, one thing came quite clear, right? That so many people are focused on capacity building, right? When you want to do something, but the outcome is not there, then you have to ask the question, well, why did it happen, right? And oftentimes it's because of capacity building or not having the tools or the knowledge to do something. And so that's what this journey was about. It was about capacity building, cultivating the tools to be able to know how to do something, right? You can have the tools for something, but do you know how to use it? And so I want to say thank you to Debbie, Celeste, and Ferris for really opening this opportunity for people across the county to be able to find out, well, how do I do this, right? How do I engage in this work? And because of it, they're going to be much better at what they do professionally. And for me personally, education is so near and dear to my heart because my mother was an educator, right? Retired now, but everything I learned from her. And one of the first books that I ever read, and I'm going back and I'm reading it now, right? I'm kind of retracing my steps, trying to figure out well, how did I become the person that I am? Well, it's all starting to dawn on me now that, you know, my mother had books at home, right? And there's research that says if you grow up in a home with at least 50 books or more, you're more likely to go to college. And so one of those books that I read was All I Really Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, right? And that book really shaped my life, right? And so I said that to say this, all of the books and articles that were read during this time is going to help to shape your profession. And so 15 or 20 years from now, when you look back and you wonder, how did you become the person that you are? How did you become the teacher you are? Then you can look back at what you read, right? What you wrestled with, what made an imprint on your mind or your thoughts. So I just want to say to all of the participants that this is just the beginning of something greater. All right, so let's go ahead and transition for some closing remarks. And I'm going to, just one second, go ahead and open it up to Celeste first to be able to give some closing remarks. And then Debbie will also give closing remarks as well.
Thanks, Dr. Kinjide. I just want to say it's so rad to see this play out and the impact that it's having. And the reason I'm saying that is I recall 2020 when Dr. Kinjide extended the invitation to the other members of the African American Student Achievement Task Force to take his equity course at Cabrillo, and Sony and I were like, yes. And I still remember that course and like the impact that it had on me. And I was like, oh my God, what do I need to do in order to like spread this wealth of knowledge to everyone? And it's so rad that now here we are, like making inroads with other educators, not just like in the the community college system, but within the K-12 system where a lot of these issues actually originate in. So my heart is full. And the other thing I wanted to share as well is it's had an impact on our students. I was meeting before I got on this Zoom with two students that are a part of the this community of practice, but the students that they've been a part of it since its inception, and they're still carrying on, and they are like going to meet with Ferris again soon about like the work that they're wanting to do within the criminal justice system, and just the impact that the ripple effects are starting to be seen. And it's rad, and I'm just looking forward to it continuing to move on. So thank you all so much for the work that you're doing.
And Debbie.
Thank you, everyone, for your amazing presentations. And I know I feel really invigorated after listening to what people are working on. And I know that this is just a small amount of the people who are part of the COP, including the students who are working on these projects. So this is just a tip of the iceberg, which is wonderful. And I just also want to acknowledge Dr. Ferris Sabah and just his continuing focus on equity at the heart of everything that we do, and student voice at the heart of everything that we do. And he has really made it possible for us to focus on the racial equity and justice community of practice, the student leadership groups, the ethnic studies work. I feel like our county office is really committed to our equity initiative in our strategic plan, and we're really we're showing it through the actions that we are doing. So I want to thank everyone who participated. I know it was a lot of work. Dr. Kofi gave you lots of homework and lots of research, but it was incredibly meaningful. And so thank you to everyone, and thank you to Dr. Kofi for your leadership in this work as well.
Yes, yes, of course. And then we're going to have Dr. Sabah to give some comments, and then Judith as well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kofi. I have to admit, I actually got emotional watching these presentations, just being able to see this this journey that we're on, and seeing how these actions, the vision for students kind of manifesting. These presentations were brilliant. And so I'm just so impressed by what I heard and saw today. Just the complexity and the heart that was involved is just inspiring. So really proud to be a part of this organization, and proud to just learn from you and see the great work that's being done. Thank you, Dr. Kofi, for giving us the tools to continue and further our efforts for equity, and to the presenters and just congratulations. You're amazing, and I feel so proud and just honored to be listening to this tonight.
Yeah, thank you. And Judith.
Thank you. I actually just have one question and one comment. The first one is, I was able to join until very late because of other meetings. And I'm wondering, your presentation will be available on the COE website, or where might we be able to find a recording?
So thank you for the question. I am recording it. And so we will review it, and then we will, with the permission of the participants, we will be able to put it on our website. So I will definitely follow up on that. So it is being recorded. So thank you.
Thank you. And the other one is just a comment. I really appreciated the point about how books are so important. And I have to tell you all that as I've been reading a lot more about anti-racism, a book that has really sparked a lot of important insights for me is about the Latino identity in relationship to race. And this book that Dr. Laura Gomez, a professor at UCLA, wrote about inventing Latinos is worth taking a look at. And I think it is worth including in the conversation about racial equity. So.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, everything that we experience today, well, let me say the vast majority of what we experience has been socially constructed or developed right through the decisions that have been made, and more often than not, decisions that have been made by those who are in power and have control over resources. All right, well, it's been a great evening. I hope that you have a great weekend. And I look forward to seeing you sometime in the near future.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Beautiful presentations.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.